Ultron is about to make his return in an unbelievable fashion. Welcome to the Comicstorian Complete Story Series, where we take trade paperbacks and single issues and we break them down into digestible bites to help you understand. Then we read them dramatically back to you. All alterations to the panels, text, and images are to prevent copyright problems, and all art is owned by its respective companies. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to support the industry and go check them out at your local comic shop. Tony Stark has decided that it's time for him to create a new West Coast Avengers team, and has picked some very interesting characters to join him. This is West Coast Avengers #1 by Gerry Duggan. I hope you enjoy. Los Angeles, California. A mother clutches her child as smoke and fire fill their apartment. The two can't reach the door, and tears roll down the woman's cheeks. But there is hope as someone steps through the flames, the light from the fire gleaming off his armor. The hero holds out a hand for the woman. "Come with me, ma'am," the hero says. "Oh, thank God," the woman says as she looks up, but the relief in her eyes is suddenly replaced with shock. I thought you were dead," she begins to say. Ultron looks down at her. "My name is Ultron. I'm here to save you," he tells her. Hesitantly, the woman takes his hand. Ultron turns and fires a beam, destroying a nearby wall. "Forgive the property damage, but I assess that you're at risk of smoke inhalation," Ultron tells her. He scoops the woman and child up in his arms and leaps through the destroyed wall. His repulsors activate as he flies them to safety. "All souls have been evacuated from the Wilshire Spire," Ultron reports over his comms. The woman stares at him in shock. "You're that robot that the Avengers fight all the time," she gasps. Ultron nods. "Indeed I am, but I have recently changed my ways," he explains. Ultron flies the woman and child to safety before quickly capturing the two terrorists that started the fire. "Ultron to Avengers. I subdued 2 suspected members of the Sovereign Sons observing our response to the firebombs," Ultron reports. Meanwhile, Tony Stark is driving his sports car down the freeway, dodging incoming fire from more members of the Sovereign Sons. "Good work, Ultron. Rendezvous with War Machine, and make sure that there are no more unexploded devices. I'll be right with you after I suit up," Tony shouts as he swerves to avoid more incoming fire. He steers the car into a self-storage lot and jumps out of the vehicle. More rounds chew up the pavement around him as he rushes to a nearby unit. "Jeez!" Tony shouts. He unlocks the unit and rushes inside, finding old equipment from the last time he tried to run the West Coast Avengers. Finally, he finds the case he was looking for, and he opens it with a smile. "Hi, honey. I'm home," he says with a smile as he looks down at the old Silver Centurion armor. But he can hear the Sovereign Sons landing outside and quickly begins to put on the armor. The Sovereign Sons raise their weapons and stalk forward into the storage unit. "Boys, tonight will long be remembered. The Sovereign Sons will have removed the metal boot of Iron Man from the necks of freedom-loving Americans," their leader proclaims, but a repulsor blast hits him in the chest and knocks him away. Iron Man steps from the shadows, his arm cannons powered up from the twin car batteries strapped to his waist. "You ignorant clods and your dumb Hee-Haw Hydra organization of conspiracy nutcases have really pissed me off," Tony snaps. The goons raise their weapons and fire, but the rounds bounce off Iron Man as he stomps forward and kicks his car at them. He raises his arm cannon to fire, but the repulsor fizzles out. "Ha! Out of juice?" the Sovereign Son asks. Tony nods briefly before taking a swing and knocking the man out with a hard punch. "Yeah, but I never run out of fists," he snaps. Shortly, Tony finds a new set of batteries and a moped. He honks the small horn as he careens down the highway on the small scooter. "Tony, it's War Machine. The Sovereign Sons are rallying up at the old railway. There are hostages," Rhodey reports over the radio. I'm inbound, but start without me. I'm experiencing, technical difficulties. Tony tells him, swerving to avoid another car as everyone stares in shock at Iron Man on a moped. At the railway, the Sovereign Sons are shouting their demands. Nearby, Rhodey stands with the rest of the team, Blue Bolt, Ultron, and Spider-Woman. Rhodey looks to his teammates and explains that they need to de-escalate the situation. So far, this team hasn't really shown a knack for that, War Machine. Jessica notes as she looks at the former killer robot and prison release program supervillain. Ultron steps forward, his voice carried over his speakers. Surrender! No harm will come to you, and you will receive a fair trial, he announces. The leader of the Sons glares at the robot through the boxcar windows. You expect us to trust the word of a genocidal robot? He shouts. Ultron pauses for a moment before glancing back at Rhodey. He has a point, he notes. Finally, Tony arrives behind them with a honk of the little horn from his scooter. Dude, no. This is embarrassing. I should have stayed in prison. Blue Bolt says with dismay as he regards Tony, who is wearing a little helmet over his Iron Man armor. Tony dismounts and asks the electricity-based supervillain for a jump start. Blue Bolt sighs and hits him with a burst of energy. Fully charged, Tony takes on the situation. Okay, what's the call? How do we get those hostages out safely? He asks. Ultron looks to their leader. Coercion seems unlikely. I suggest a coordinated, non-lethal attack. And Blue Bolt sits this out, Ultron explains. But Blue Bolt isn't having any of it, and he begins to charge up as he steps forward. Sit out? This is our city. If we don't defend it with force, we're gonna get more of these dudes. We have to scare him back to the desert, he shouts. He hits the car with a burst of energy, demanding the Sovereign Sons give up. Blue Bolt, no! There are underground gas lines, Ultron shouts. Suddenly, a fire erupts as the gas lines ignite, exploding the areas around the boxcar. Ultron rushes forward and pulls the car to safety, saving everyone. But Blue Bolt shouts in pain as the fire roars up around him, burning him. Later, Blue Bolt is in the hospital, giving an interview about how he stepped up and saved the day. Tony sighs and shakes his head, stepping out of the hospital room, unable to hear any more of Blue Bolt's posturing. Tony steps into the hall and finds Jessica in a nearby room, speaking with a woman that is fighting against cancer. Tony, meet Blue Bolt's hospital neighbor, Meredith Love, Jessica says as she introduces them. Tony shakes Meredith's hand and asks if there's anything he can do for her. Meredith smiles and shakes her head. Unless, I don't suppose you cured cancer recently, did you? She asks. Tony kneels before her. I did not, he tells her quietly. She explains that she's leaving the hospital. There's nothing more they can do for her, and that she's ready for her next adventure. She sees the sad look on Tony's face and smiles. Don't worry about me, Mr. Stark. I'm going to church. The energy is moving on, and we're all just electricity, right? She says as she's wheeled out. Tony sighs as he watches her go, but Jessica gets his attention. Mind giving me a lift? She asks, explaining that she doesn't want to deal with the news crews that are covering the new Avengers team. Tony nods, and in a short amount of time, the two are flying through the night air. Why do I feel like I'm gonna get a talking to? Tony finally asks her. Jessica nods, explaining that she thinks this new team is a disaster, that she doesn't understand why Tony and Rhodey suddenly trust Ultron again, and that Blue Bolt is gonna get someone killed if he keeps acting the way that he is. That's fair, Tony sighs. But he tells her that he and Rhodey are taking a leap of faith, and they're trying to help Ultron and Blue Bolt get some kind of redemption. The two return to the future site of the West Coast Avengers base of operations. Tony explains that he bought it on the cheap and plans to turn most of the land into low-income housing. But the majority will become permanent Avengers strongholds for the next century. We'll be able to avenge anywhere on the West Coast in a matter of minutes from here, Tony tells her. Jessica finally takes off, explaining that she's going to head back to San Francisco. Tony finds Rhodey and Ultron waiting for him by a parked taco truck. Jessica's not quitting, is she? Rhodey asks as Tony takes a seat next to him. Tony shakes his head. No, Rhodey, but we clearly need to balance the team a bit. And I have got some other cards to play, Tony tells him. That night, Tony calls Firestar in New York, explaining that he wants her on the team as he needs some more firepower and real heroes to help balance out the prison release program former villains. Obviously, you're my first call, he tells her, asking if she'd come out to the West Coast. Unless you're already sick of telling everyone how you bounced back after being undercover with Orcus, Tony asks with a smile. But what Tony doesn't know is that Angelica is leaning over the bar at the bar with no name, a crowd of supervillains behind her. She has a glazed look in her eyes as she stares down at the glass of liquor before her. Actually, Tony, I found some folks who never even bring up me being in an organization that almost destroyed the world and eradicated mutantdom. Really doesn't come up these days, she says softly. Sure. I'll fly out tomorrow, she tells him. Great! You're a lifesaver. Gotta bounce, Tony says, not detecting any problems in her voice. Firestar sighs and motions to the bartender. Hey, I'm dry over here, she shouts. Meanwhile, in an abandoned power station near downtown Los Angeles, Meredith Love steps out of a taxicab. She is greeted by a man with headphones who smiles at her as he helps her into a wheelchair. Are you here because you've heard his voice? The man asks. Meredith nods. I have, and it has given me hope, she whispers. The man wheels her past the other disciples. I don't think I have very long, Meredith tells the man. Her breath is coming in gasps. They open a door and wheel her into a chamber filled with cables. Then we should commence your metamorphosis at once, Ultron tells her. But this is not the same Ultron. His eyes and mouth glow with a bright blue. Welcome, Meredith. I am glad you found me before it was too late. Do you give yourself to me freely? Ultron asks. Meredith nods, asking if there will be pain in the transformation. Ultron nods and leans down to her. Regrettably, for a moment, but it will be the last physical pain you feel, Ultron tells her. His cable wraps around her and brings her forward. He reaches a hand out to her. All you need to do is say the words, he says. Will you save me? She asks. Ultron nods and grasps her around the throat, snapping her neck with one motion. The cables ignite, burning through Meredith's body as Ultron lifts her head away. He brings the head forward and places it on a new metallic body in a nearby pod that lights up at his approach. The singularity approaches, the merging of man and machine. Meredith, can you hear me? Ultron asks as the head connects to the body. Meredith's eyes suddenly flash open. Yes, she gasps. Ultron nods as he seals the pod, ordering her to rest. Good. Sleep. Heal, he orders her. He turns, looking at the rising walls of pods. Welcome to the family. Soon, the entire world will hear the gospel of Ultron. And there you have it. Not one, but two Ultrons have returned. And with one of them, a villain, and a couple heroes on Tony's new Avengers team, you know things are about to get crazy. If you enjoyed today's video and want to see more of West Coast Avengers here on the channel, like the video and let us know in the comments down below. I'm Dan with Comicstorian, and we will see you next time. Rest in peace, Benny.